The wind came first. It always did in Wyoming territory, whispering warnings through the pine branches before the real fury descended. December 1883 brought a cold that cut deeper than any knife, and Eleanor Hartwell, 29 years old and already bearing publications in major veterinary journals, learned this truth the hard way. She sat rigid in the wagon, her gloved fingers gripping the wooden seat until her knuckles ached. Two hired cowboys rode ahead, their silhouettes wavering in the gathering whiteness. The air tasted of iron and ice. Above, the sky had transformed from blue to a sickly gray, the color of old pewter left too long in winter rain. Eleanor had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia. 3 weeks of rattling trains and dusty stagecoaches. 3 weeks of moving farther from everything she knew and closer to something she could only imagine. Her father's letter had been clear. Thornridge Ranch needed expertise in cattle breeding. The contract offered 6 months of work, generous pay, and the chance to prove her veterinary knowledge in practical application. Dr. James Hartwell had taught his daughter well, even if the medical schools back east refused to acknowledge a woman's capability. The wind strengthened. Snow began to fall soft at first like ash from a distant fire, then harder. The flakes grew fat and aggressive, driven horizontal by gusts that made the wagon lurch. "Miss Hartwell." The lead cowboy turned in his saddle, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "We need to find shelter, storms coming in fast." She nodded, pulling her wool coat tighter. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the span of minutes. Her breath formed clouds that the wind tore away before they could fully materialize. Then the world went white. The blizzard struck with the force of divine rage. Visibility vanished. The horses screamed, rearing in panic. Eleanor felt the wagon tilt, heard the crack of wood, and then she was falling, tumbling through snow that felt solid as stone. She hit the ground hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. When she tried to stand, her boots found no purchase. The snow was already knee-deep and rising. She called out, but the wind swallowed her voice. The 2 cowboys had vanished. The horses had bolted. The wagon lay on its side like a dying animal. Eleanor spun in a slow circle, trying to distinguish north from south, up from down. Everything was white. The cold penetrated her coat, her dress, her skin. Her fingers began to lose feeling. She thought of her father, of his face, when she had told him she was accepting the Wyoming contract. Pride mixed with worry in his aging eyes. She thought she might die here alone in this endless white hell, and no one would find her body until spring thaw. Then she heard it. The sound of hooves, steady and sure, cutting through the chaos. A shape materialized from the storm. Horse and rider moving with impossible confidence through conditions that should have made travel suicidal. The horse was black as midnight, its mane thick with ice. The rider sat tall in the saddle, wrapped in heavy furs and leather that made him look like something from another age. Eleanor could see only his eyes. Gray as winter steel, sharp as broken glass. They found her, assessed her, measured her chances in the space of a heartbeat. He said nothing. Speech was pointless in the screaming wind. Instead, he extended one arm, the gesture carrying absolute authority. Eleanor hesitated for perhaps a second. Then survival instinct overwhelmed pride. She reached up, felt his hand close around her wrist, and gasped at the strength in that grip. He pulled her up and onto the horse behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. His body was solid as the mountains themselves. Heat radiated from him despite the killing cold. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his waist, pressed her face against his back, and felt his free hand settle over hers, holding her secure, keeping her alive. The horse plunged forward into the storm. Time lost meaning. Eleanor drifted between consciousness and something darker. The cold wanted to take her, to pull her down into sleep that would never end. But the warmth of the man in front of her kept her tethered to life. She felt his breathing steady and deep, felt the movement of his body as he guided the horse through terrain he must have known by instinct alone. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Eleanor could no longer tell. Then the wind lessened, the snow thinned, and through her frost-burned eyes she saw structures emerging from the whiteness. buildings of log and stone arranged in a complex that spoke of wealth and permanence, corrals and barns, bunkhouses with smoke rising from chimneys, a main house that looked carved from the mountain itself. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, then lifted Eleanor down. Her legs buckled. He caught her supporting her weight effortlessly and carried her toward the main house. She wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but her mouth would not form words. Inside warmth hit her like a physical force. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames leaping and crackling. The rider set her down on a leather sofa, then moved to the fire, adding logs with practiced efficiency. Only then did he remove the scarf covering his face. Eleanor felt what little breath she had left catch in her throat. The man before her had features that looked carved by the same hand that shaped the Wyoming peaks. Strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. Full lips pressed into a line of concentration. High cheekbones and a nose that had been broken at least once. A small scar curved along his left cheek, pale against sun-darkened skin. But it was his eyes that held her. Gray and penetrating, carrying depths of pain and strength in equal measure. He was tall, she realized, perhaps 6'3", broad through the shoulders in a way that came from genuine labor, not gymnasium exercise. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with rope and leather and unforgiving elements. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like whiskey aged in oak barrels. "Welcome, Miss Hartwell. I am Nathaniel Thornridge. It seems fate wanted our meeting to be somewhat dramatic." Eleanor blinked, trying to process how this stranger knew her name. Her thoughts moved slowly, still half frozen. He must have seen her confusion. The ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. "I was alerted about the storm. Rode out to intercept the escort wagon when we lost contact. Found your medical bag in the snow. Your father's name is stamped on the leather. Dr. James Hartwell, the man who saved my life 8 years ago at Fort Laramie." Understanding dawned. Her father had mentioned treating soldiers and ranchers during his years as an army surgeon. The name Thornridge sounded familiar from old letters. "You were supposed to arrive tomorrow." Nathaniel continued, moving to a cabinet and pouring amber liquid into a glass. "The storm changed those plans. Here, drink this. Slowly." He pressed the glass into her hands. Whiskey. She normally did not touch spirits, but the warmth spreading through her chest as she sipped felt like salvation. Nathaniel stepped back, maintaining a respectful distance. His eyes never left her face, though, and Eleanor felt the weight of that gaze. Assessment, concern, and something else she could not quite name. "The other men," she managed to ask. "The cowboys escorting me. Sam took riders out looking. The storm is breaking. If they found shelter, they will survive." His certainty was oddly comforting. This was a man accustomed to harsh realities, to loss and survival in equal measure. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, "for saving my life." Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. "The mountains take what they want. Today they did not want you. Rest now, Miss Hartwell. We will speak more come morning." He turned toward the door, moving with the economical grace of a man who never wasted motion. "Mr. Thornridge." He paused, glancing back. "My father spoke of you. He said you were a man of honor." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "Your father is a generous man in his assessments," Nathaniel said softly. Then he was gone, the door closing with quiet finality behind him. Eleanor sat in the warm room, still shivering despite the fire. She had come to Wyoming expecting challenge. She had not expected this. Had not expected a man who rode through killing storms as if they were spring rain. Had not expected eyes that could see straight through to her soul. She finished the whiskey and let exhaustion claim her. The next morning arrived with the surreal silence that only follows a great storm. Eleanor woke in a bed she did not remember reaching, covered in quilts that smelled of cedar and sage. Sunlight streamed through windows, painfully bright against the snow. Someone had laid out clean clothes for her, a simple wool dress in forest green, far finer than anything in her traveling trunk. The fabric felt expensive beneath her fingers. Practical boots sat beside the bed lined with fur against the cold. Eleanor dressed quickly, her scientist's mind cataloging details. The room was spacious, but not ostentatious. Hand-hewn furniture of dark wood. A single oil painting on the wall showing mountains at sunset. Everything spoke of wealth, earned through hard work rather than inherited luxury. She found her way downstairs by following the smell of coffee and wood smoke. The main room looked different in daylight, larger than she had realized. Native American rugs covered polished wooden floors, leather furniture arranged around that magnificent stone fireplace, and windows, so many windows, all showcasing the impossible beauty of the land beyond. An older man stood by the fire pouring coffee from a tin pot. He turned as she entered, and his weathered face creased into a welcoming smile. "Dr. Hartwell, good to see you vertical. I am Samuel Bridger. Friends call me Sam. I manage this operation for Mr. Thornridge." He was perhaps 65, with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of winter rivers. His handshake was firm, but not crushing the grip of a man secure in his strength. "Please call me Eleanor, or Ellie, and thank you for the clothes. They fit perfectly." Sam's smile widened. Those belonged to Mr. Thornridge's late sister. She would be glad to know they are being put to use. "Coffee," Eleanor accepted gratefully. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but welcome after the previous day's ordeal. "The two cowboys who were escorting me," she asked. "Found them this morning. Took shelter in a line shack about 5 miles east. Cold and embarrassed, but alive. Your trunk arrived with them." Relief flooded through her. She had not wanted deaths on her conscience before her work even began. "And Mr. Thornridge, working the corrals. Man rises before the sun most days. Come, I will show you the ranch while breakfast cooks." Sam led her outside into air so cold and clean it hurt to breathe. The sun blazed in a sky of impossible blue. Snow covered everything, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale. But this was no fantasy. This was Thornridge Ranch, and it was massive. Sam walked her through the complex, pointing out structures with obvious pride. The main house sat at the center, 3 stories of log and stone that could house 12 people comfortably. Around it, arranged like satellites, stood the working buildings, 3 bunkhouses for the ranch hands. Sam explained that Nathaniel employed 40 men year-round, more during spring roundup and fall gather. Each bunkhouse had its own kitchen and common area. Beyond those, the barns, one for horses housing perhaps 200 animals, another for equipment and supplies, a third largest of all for the cattle operation. Breeding stock kept separate from the main herd. Corrals stretched in all directions. Eleanor saw cattle bearing the Thornridge brand, a stylized T merged with a mountain peak, thousands of them dark shapes against white snow. 50,000 acres, Sam said, gesturing at the land that rolled away to distant peaks. 3 generations of Thornridge blood and sweat, 5,000 head of cattle, best horses in Wyoming territory, and all of it depending on the work you are here to do. Eleanor felt the weight of expectation settle onto her shoulders. The contract mentioned problems with calf mortality. Sam nodded grimly. "Losing 30% every spring. Something in the breeding, we think, or disease we cannot identify. Mr. Thornridge has tried everything. You are our last hope, truth be told." They reached the breeding barn, and Sam pushed open the massive doors. Inside, the smell hit Eleanor immediately. Hay and manure, yes, but also sickness. Her trained nose detected respiratory infection, malnutrition, stress. "May I see the breeding records?" she asked. Sam led her to a small office attached to the barn. Ledgers lined the shelves, each one meticulously maintained. Eleanor pulled down the most recent volume and began to read. The handwriting was precise, almost elegant. Each breeding carefully documented. Dates, bloodlines, outcomes. She traced the entries back through the years, noting patterns. "Who keeps these records?" she asked. "Mr. Thornridge himself. Started the day he took over the ranch. 8 years of data there." 8 years. Eleanor noticed a gap in one ledger. 6 months where no breeding had been attempted at all. She was about to ask about it when the office door opened. Nathaniel Thornridge filled the doorway. In daylight, without the heavy winter gear, he looked somehow larger. He wore simple working clothes, denim pants stained with mud and worse, a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows despite the cold, leather vest, boots that had seen 1,000 miles. His eyes found Eleanor, and she felt that same jolt of awareness from the previous night. "Dr. Hartwell, I trust you slept well." His voice carried the same rough warmth she remembered. Eleanor stood suddenly very aware of the borrowed dress of her hair still slightly disheveled from sleep. "Yes, thank you. And please call me Eleanor. You saved my life yesterday. I think we can dispense with excessive formality." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps. "Then you must call me Nate. Only my grandfather was Mr. Thornridge, and he has been dead these 10 years. He moved into the small office, and Eleanor caught his scent. Worn saddle leather mountain pine horse and honest labor. Not unpleasant, earthy and real. "Sam is showing you the operation?" Nate asked. "He is. I was just reviewing your breeding records. They are remarkably detailed. A man should know his stock. Every animal on this ranch has a history, a purpose. I noticed a gap. Here." Eleanor pointed to the 6-month absence of entries. "What happened?" Nate's face went carefully blank. "An accident. I was recovering. The breeding program paused." He offered no further explanation, and something in his tone suggested the subject was closed. Sam cleared his throat. "I should see to breakfast. Miss Eleanor, you will join us in the main house. Mr. Thornridge keeps a good table." Eleanor agreed, and Sam departed with the subtle grace of a man who knew when to make himself scarce. Alone with Nate in the small office, Eleanor felt the air grow charged. He stood too close in the confined space. She could see the scar on his cheek more clearly now, old wound long healed but deep enough to have required stitches. "Your father was a good doctor," Nate said quietly. "When that bull gored me, I was certain I would die. He worked on me for 6 hours, saved my life." So that was the accident. Bull goring. Eleanor had seen such injuries during her father's practice. They were often fatal. The fact that Nate stood before her whole and healthy spoke to her father's skill. "I am glad he could help," she said. Nate's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he stepped back, putting professional distance between them. "The work you are here to do is critical, Eleanor. This ranch is more than business to me. It is legacy. My grandfather signed treaties with the Arapaho tribe. My father expanded the land through fair dealing and hard work. I am the last Thornridge. If I fail, 3 generations end with me." The weight in his voice told Eleanor this was more than simple family pride. This was burden, duty, the kind of responsibility that could crush a man if he let it. "I will do everything in my power to help," she promised. Nate nodded, then moved toward the door. He paused there, glancing back. "Welcome to Thornridge Ranch, Eleanor. I hope the work proves worthwhile." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with the ledgers and the scent of leather and pine. The first 3 weeks passed in a blur of work. Eleanor threw herself into examining the cattle, taking samples, studying bloodlines. The problem revealed itself slowly, like a photograph emerging in chemical bath. It was not disease, it was nutrition. The winter feed lacked critical minerals. The cows were malnourished, their bodies unable to sustain healthy pregnancies. The solution was simple, expensive but simple. She presented her findings to Nate one afternoon in his office. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he sat back in his chair. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without controlled trials. But the evidence is clear. Supplement the feed with these minerals, improve the hay quality, and I believe we will see significant improvement." "That will cost considerable money." "Legacy is not cheap, Nate." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from stern to almost boyish. It made Eleanor's heart do something complicated in her chest. "Order what you need," he said. "I will wire Denver today." True to his word, supplies began arriving within the week. Eleanor implemented her program working alongside the ranch hands. They were skeptical at first, these weather-beaten men who had spent their lives with cattle. But they saw her dedication, saw she was not afraid of hard work or getting dirty, and slowly they accepted her. Nate came to the breeding barn most evenings, always with some excuse, checking on a particular animal, reviewing records, asking about progress. But Eleanor began to suspect the real reason was simply to see her. They talked about science and ranching, about the land and the weather. Gradually, the conversations grew more personal. Eleanor told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about learning medicine from her father, despite the closed doors of formal education, about the loneliness of being a woman in a field that wanted no women. Nate spoke of his childhood on the ranch, of his parents dead now from influenza, of 2 younger sisters also gone to disease, of being the sole survivor of his family line, carrying the weight of their expectations. "My grandfather used to say, 'The land remembers,'" Nate told her one evening as they walked between the corrals, "that it knows who treats it with respect. The Arapaho believed the same thing. We are stewards, not owners. And a steward who fails his trust has failed everything." Eleanor heard the pain beneath his words, the fear of being that failed steward. "You have not failed," she said quietly. "You are still fighting, still trying. That is what matters." Nate stopped walking, turned to face her. The sunset painted the snow in shades of orange and gold. His gaze caught the light turning from steel to molten silver. "You see things differently than most, Eleanor. You make me believe in possibilities I stopped believing in years ago." Her breath caught. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. Then a ranch hand called out from the barn, breaking the spell. Nate stepped back, the moment lost, but Eleanor felt it. The connection growing between them, dangerous and inevitable as the Wyoming winter. On the 23rd day of her employment, Nate invited her to dinner. Not in the main house, but up on a ridge overlooking the ranch valley. He had arranged it simply, but with obvious care. Blankets spread on the snow, a small fire for warmth, food packed in tin containers. They sat side by side, looking out over the land as the sun disappeared behind distant peaks. The sky turned purple, then indigo. Stars emerged one by one until the heavens blazed with light. "My grandfather taught me the constellations," Nate said, pointing to the sky. "Both the European names and the Arapaho. That one there, what you would call Orion, the Arapaho call the Great Hunter. Those stars tell the story of a man who went seeking his lost love and found her transformed into a white buffalo." "A sad story," Eleanor observed, "but a true one. The Arapaho do not believe in happy endings. They believe in true endings, and sometimes truth is sad." He lowered his arm but did not move away. If anything, he leaned slightly closer. "This land has been Thorn Ridge territory for 50 years, he continued. "Before that, Standing Bear's people for centuries. We have treaty, mutual respect. But if I die without heir, the territorial government will seize the land. Break the treaty. Everything ends." Eleanor understood then. The full weight he carried. Not just family legacy, but political responsibility. The fate of an entire people tied to his ability to produce an heir. "There are other ways to leave legacy," she said softly. "The treaties you honor, the way you treat your people, the land you protect." Nate's hand moved across the blanket. His fingers found hers, rough calluses against her softer skin. "You give me hope I have no right to feel," he whispered. Eleanor turned to look at him, found his face inches from her own, saw the longing in his eyes, the war between desire and duty. "Nate," she breathed. He leaned in. She felt his breath warm against her lips, felt her own eyes begin to close. Then hoofbeats shattered the night. A rider came fast up the trail, horse lathered despite the cold. One of the ranch hands, his face urgent in the firelight. "Boss, Miss Blackwood is here. Says it is urgent." Nate pulled back as if burned. His face transformed, all softness vanishing behind a mask of professional courtesy. "I will be down shortly," he told the rider. Then to Eleanor, voice carefully neutral. "I apologize. I must handle this." He stood, offered his hand to help her up. The moment between them might never have existed. They rode down to the ranch house in silence. Eleanor felt confusion warring with hurt. Who was Miss Blackwood? Why did her arrival cause such reaction? She got her answer when they reached the main house. A woman stood in the courtyard, backlit by lanterns. She was beautiful in the way of expensive things. Tall and elegant, her riding habit clearly tailored by expert hands. Dark hair pinned perfectly despite the evening ride. Features that would launch ships and end kingdoms. She turned as Nate approached, and her face lit with calculated pleasure. "Nathaniel, darling, father sent me. There is trouble with the railroad surveyors. They are marking through our water source." Our. The possessive pronoun hung in the cold air like accusation. The woman moved to Nate, placed her hand on his arm with the familiarity of long acquaintance. Her eyes scanned the area, found Eleanor standing in shadow. "Oh," she said, voice dripping false sweetness. "You must be the livestock consultant from the East. How rustic of you to dine outdoors in winter." Eleanor stepped into the light, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "Dr. Eleanor Hartwell. I am researching cattle breeding optimization for Mr. Thornridge." The woman's laugh was high and artificial, like wind chimes made of glass. "How quaint. Playing veterinarian. I suppose someone must handle the animals." The insult was thinly veiled, barely civilized. Nate moved between them, his voice carrying edge Eleanor had not heard before. "Dr. Hartwell is a respected professional. Her work here is critical to the ranch's future." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Assessment, calculation, recognition of threat. "Of course, darling. I meant no offense." Darling. There was that word again. Eleanor felt her world tilt. Understanding crashed over her like the blizzard that had nearly killed her. "We should discuss the railroad matter inside," Nate said, his voice carefully neutral. "Eleanor, if you will excuse us." It was dismissal, polite but absolute. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She walked back toward her quarters, each step feeling like movement through deep water. Behind her she heard the woman's voice carrying on the cold air. "Nathaniel, we need to discuss the wedding preparations. Father insists on June for the ceremony. It will combine our ranches before the railroad deadline." Wedding ceremony. The words struck like physical blows. Eleanor reached her room and closed the door, leaned against it. Let the truth sink into her bones. Of course Nate was engaged. A man like him with land and wealth and responsibility would have commitments, probably arranged since childhood. Political alliance disguised as marriage. She had been a fool, a stupid Eastern fool who thought those moments meant something, who thought the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the vulnerability in his voice meant she was special. She was not special. She was hired help, a temporary solution to a livestock problem. Nothing more. Eleanor sat on the bed staring at nothing. She would not cry, would not give anyone that satisfaction. She would do her job, fulfill her contract, and leave Wyoming without looking back. But even as she made these resolutions, she felt the treacherous flutter of her heart, the memory of almost kisses and whispered words, the warmth of his hand on hers beneath the stars. Downstairs, Nate stood in his office with Victoria Blackwood, listening to her chatter about wedding details he did not care about. His mind was still on the ridge, on gray-blue eyes and soft lips, on the way Eleanor looked at him like he was more than his failures. Sam found him there an hour later after Victoria had finally departed. "You are making a mistake, son." Nate did not pretend to misunderstand. "It is already decided, Sam. 2 years ago, when the doctors confirmed I would never father children. Victoria knows. Her family knows. It is business arrangement. Merge the ranches, secure water rights, save Blackwood from bankruptcy." "And what about that girl Eleanor?" Nate's hands clenched into fists. "She is here to fix the cattle breeding. In 6 months she returns east. This," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the ranch, his life, everything. "This cannot happen." "You are lying to yourself, boy." "It does not matter." Nate's voice rose, rare anger surfacing. I cannot give her children. I cannot give her the life she deserves. What right do I have to feel what I feel when I am broken? He walked to the window, staring out at mountains silhouetted against stars. The engagement stands, he said quietly. Honor demands nothing less. Sam looked at the young man he had helped raise, saw the pain carved into every line of his body, and said nothing more. Some lessons could only be learned through suffering. But he picked up the medical ledger Nate kept locked in his desk, the one with Dr. Hartwell's diagnosis from 8 years ago. Sam had questions about that diagnosis, questions that needed answers. The following week crawled by with painful slowness. Eleanor buried herself in work, spending dawn to dusk in the breeding barns. She took her meals in her quarters, avoided the main house and any chance of encountering Nate. But the ranch was not large enough to avoid him completely. She would see him working with the horses, his movements fluid and sure. Would catch glimpses of him in conversation with Sam, his face serious with concentration. Would hear his voice carrying across the corrals, giving orders in that deep, steady tone that made something inside her ache. Victoria Blackwood became a constant presence. She arrived at the ranch 3 or 4 times each week, always with some urgent matter requiring Nate's attention. She began redecorating the main house dining room without asking permission, ordered new china from Denver, hired a wedding planner from Cheyenne. The staff whispered about it, about Miss Blackwood taking over before the wedding even occurred, about how the old housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had been dismissed for some imagined slight. Sam quietly rehired Mrs. Chen. His authority as ranch manager allowed such decisions, and Nate did not contradict him. Eleanor tried to focus on her research. The mineral supplementation was showing results. Cows that had been listless and thin began to put on weight. Their coats grew shinier. Early pregnancy exams showed better development. She was succeeding, doing exactly what she had been hired to do. So why did success taste like ashes in her mouth? Late one evening, working by lamplight in the breeding barn, Eleanor made a discovery that changed everything. She had been reviewing breeding patterns in the cattle, comparing them to scientific papers she had brought from Philadelphia. Bulls that had been considered sterile after injury sometimes recovered fertility, given enough time and proper conditions. The human body worked similarly. Trauma could cause temporary dysfunction, but temporary was not permanent. Eleanor's hands began to shake as she pulled the old injury reports, found the one from 8 years ago, bull goring, massive pelvic trauma, emergency surgery performed by Dr. James Hartwell. Her father. Her father had been the one to declare Nate sterile. But what if the diagnosis had been incomplete? Medical science in 1875 had been crude compared to modern techniques. Battlefield surgery focused on saving lives, not preserving future fertility. 8 years of healing, 8 years of recovery. What if the damage had not been permanent? Eleanor sat back, mind racing. She could not know for certain without modern tests, but the possibility existed. The scientific probability was actually quite high. She needed to tell Nate. But how? They had barely spoken in days. And even if she told him, what if she was wrong? What if she gave him hope only to have it crushed? The ethical dilemma paralyzed her. Then she heard footsteps, looked up to find Nate standing in the barn doorway, lamplight casting long shadows across his face. "Working late," he observed. Not a question. "The research requires it." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Nate moved into the barn, walking slowly down the center aisle. He stopped at a stall containing a pregnant mare, ran his hand along her neck with obvious affection. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly, not looking at Eleanor. "About Victoria. You owe me nothing. You are my employer. Your personal life is none of my concern." The formality in her voice made him flinch. "When did I become your employer instead of Nate?" Eleanor set down her papers with carefully controlled movements. "When I learned you have a fiancé, it is proper to maintain professional distance." Nate's jaw tightened. "The engagement was arranged 2 years ago. After doctors confirmed I would never father children." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt her scientific discovery burning in her mind, demanding to be spoken. But Nate continued, his voice rough with old pain. I was 27 when the bull gored me. Charging bull during spring roundup, caught me in the pelvis. I nearly bled to death. Your father saved my life at Fort Laramie Field Hospital. He turned to face her then, and Eleanor saw the anguish in his eyes. But he could not save my ability to have children. Told me the damage was permanent, irreversible. I am the last Thornridge male, 3 generations, and I am where the line ends. Eleanor stood, moved toward him without conscious thought. Nate being unable to have biological children does not make you a failure. My grandfather built this ranch from nothing. His voice rose, rare emotion breaking through. My father defended it, expanded it, and I cannot even perform the most basic function. Cannot continue the bloodline. Cannot honor the treaties that require Thornridge heirs to maintain the land. He walked to the window, hands gripping the sill hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Victoria knows. Her family knows. It is business arrangement. Merge the ranches, secure resources, give her a position as wife to a landowner even if there will never be children. Eleanor felt tears threatening, pushed them back ruthlessly. And what about love? She asked softly. Nate laughed, the sound bitter and broken. What right do I have to ask a woman for love when I cannot give her a future, when I cannot give her children? He turned and his eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity. What right do I have to feel what I feel for you, Eleanor, when I can offer you nothing? The confession hung between them like smoke. Eleanor crossed the distance separating them, took his scarred hands in her smaller ones. There are other ways to build legacy, other ways to honor your family. Not in this territory, not with the treaties. Bloodline matters. They stood close enough that Eleanor could feel the heat of him, could see the pulse beating in his throat, could read the war between duty and desire written across his face. She made a decision. The scientist in her demanded evidence before making claims, but the woman in her could not let this man suffer under a potentially false burden. Nate, I need to ask you something. When your father's doctor diagnosed you as sterile, what exact tests did he perform? Confusion flickered across Nate's features. I do not remember details. I was barely conscious for days. He said the goring had damaged internal structures, that recovery was impossible. Did he perform follow-up examinations a year later? 2 years. No. He was transferred to another fort 6 months after the surgery. I never saw him again. Nate's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking this? Eleanor took a deep breath, committing to the path. Because medical science has advanced significantly in 8 years. Because trauma-induced dysfunction is different from permanent structural damage. Because in cattle, which I study extensively, we see fertility recovery after injury more often than you would think. Nate went very still. What are you saying? I am saying it is possible, just possible, that the diagnosis was incomplete, that 8 years ago you were sterile due to acute trauma, but today, after years of natural healing, you might not be. The words fell into silence deep as canyon walls. Nate stared at her, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, fear, and back to disbelief. Do not, he said, voice barely above a whisper, do not give me hope where there is none. I am not giving false hope. I am saying we need updated information, modern medical examination, proper testing. And if you are wrong, his voice broke on the question. If I let myself believe and it is still impossible, Eleanor squeezed his hands, then at least you will know for certain. You will not spend the rest of your life wondering what if. She paused, gathering courage. But Nate, what if I am right? Before he could answer, before either could process the magnitude of what had just been said, the barn door burst open. Sam stood there, his face grim. Boss, we have trouble. Blackwood ranch hands are tearing down fences on the north boundary, stealing cattle. Douglas Blackwood is claiming water rights disputes give him access. The moment shattered like glass. Nate's face transformed, all vulnerability vanishing behind the mask of the rancher. The leader, the man who bore responsibility for 50,000 acres and the people who depended on them. "Round up the men," he ordered, already moving toward the door. "I will meet you at the corrals in 5 minutes." Sam nodded and departed. Nate paused in the doorway, glanced back at Eleanor. "We will continue this conversation," he said, "soon." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the barn with lamplight and possibilities and the terrible, wonderful uncertainty of hope. The night ride to the north boundary passed in grim silence. 12 men, Nate leading Sam at his right hand. The horses moved fast through snow that had frozen into a treacherous crust. Moonlight turned the landscape silver and black, beautiful and merciless. Eleanor had watched them go from the barn doorway. Nate sat his horse like he had been born to the saddle rifle, resting easy across his lap. He had not looked back. She stood there long after the riders disappeared into the darkness, her mind churning with the conversation they had been forced to abandon. The possibility she had presented to him, the hope that might be false, the medical tests that needed arranging, and beneath it all the terrible awareness that Nate was engaged to another woman, that whatever feelings existed between them had nowhere to go. That hope, even if proven true, might change nothing. The riders returned near dawn. Eleanor heard them before she saw them, the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices carrying across the frozen air. She had not slept, had spent the night in her quarters going through medical journals and making calculations. From her window, she watched Nate dismount. Even at this distance, she could see the exhaustion in his movements, but no blood, no injured men being carried. Whatever had happened at the boundary, it had been resolved without violence. She forced herself to turn away, forced herself to remember her place here. Hired consultant, nothing more. The ranch stirred to life around her. Cowboys heading to the corrals for morning chores, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimneys. The ordinary rhythm of a working ranch continuing regardless of midnight confrontations or unspoken feelings. Eleanor made herself wait until a decent hour before seeking out Sam. She found him in the equipment barn, checking saddles and tack with the methodical attention he brought to everything. "The trouble last night?" she asked without preamble. Sam glanced up, his weathered face showing approval at her directness. "Blackwood hands trying to steal cattle. Claimed water rights gave them access through our land. Nate faced them down without firing a shot. Made them return the stock and repair the fence. Douglas Blackwood is desperate then. Dying more like." Sam's voice carried grim certainty. "Tuberculosis. 6 months at most. Man is trying to secure his daughter's future before he goes." Eleanor felt an unwelcome stab of sympathy. She understood desperation, understood the lengths people went to for those they loved. "Sam, I need to ask you something about Nate's injury 8 years ago." The old man's eyes sharpened. "What about it?" "Do you remember the diagnosis?" "The exact words, doctor." "Hartwell used—" Sam was quiet for a long moment, thinking back. "Said the damage was severe, that Nate would never father children, that the injury had destroyed his ability permanently." He paused. "Why are you asking?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Because medical understanding has evolved. Because I have seen similar injuries in livestock that resolved over time. Because I think there is a possibility the diagnosis was based on immediate trauma assessment rather than long-term prognosis." Sam went very still. "You are saying he might not be sterile. I am saying modern testing could provide definitive answers, but it needs to be done discreetly, without raising hopes that might be crushed." Sam studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have contacts who could arrange this." "My father's colleagues in Denver, Dr. Benjamin Shaw specifically. He has access to the latest diagnostic equipment." "Then arrange it." Sam's voice carried quiet authority. "That boy has carried this burden for 8 years. He deserves to know the truth, whatever it is." Eleanor spent the next 5 days in careful, covert planning. She sent telegrams to Denver using coded language that would mean nothing to casual observers. Arranged for samples to be collected and transported. Set up a system of communication that would keep the testing completely confidential. Nate provided what was needed without question, though his face remained guarded. They spoke only about logistics. did not mention the barn conversation, did not acknowledge the possibility hanging between them like smoke. But Eleanor felt his eyes on her, felt the weight of unspoken questions. Victoria's presence at the ranch increased. She appeared almost daily now, always with some urgent matter. The wedding planning consumed her attention. She spoke of June ceremonies and Denver dressmakers, of guest lists and menu selections, spoke as if the marriage was inevitable as sunrise. Eleanor tried not to listen, tried to focus on her cattle research, which was showing genuine progress. The mineral supplementation had reduced calf mortality by 15% already. By spring, she projected the numbers would be even better. She should feel proud, should feel the satisfaction of professional success. Instead, she felt hollow. One afternoon, working in the breeding barn with a young ranch hand named Billy, Eleanor experienced a moment of unexpected comedy that broke through the tension. She was explaining the importance of tracking estrus cycles using technical terminology she had learned in her father's medical practice. Billy listened with increasing confusion, his face growing redder by the minute. Finally, he turned to the other cowboys gathered nearby and attempted translation. "The lady doctor says the cows need to be romantic at the right time." The bunkhouse erupted in laughter. Even Eleanor could not help but smile at the awkward interpretation. "Perhaps I should simplify my language," she said, trying to maintain professional dignity while fighting back her own laughter. "Perhaps you should," agreed a deep voice from the barn entrance. Nate stood there, and Eleanor felt her heart perform that now familiar complicated movement in her chest. He was smiling, a genuine expression that softened his stern features and made him look younger, less burdened. "City terminology does not translate well to ranch work, Dr. Hartwell." "Apparently not. I will endeavor to use more cowboy-friendly phrasing." Their eyes met across the barn, held for a moment too long. Eleanor saw something warm in his gaze, something that made her breath catch. Then Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a knife through butter. "Nathaniel, there you are. We need to discuss the ceremony details." She stood in the doorway behind Nate, silhouetted against the afternoon light. Eleanor could not see her face clearly, but she did not need to. The possessive tone said everything. Nate's expression shuddered. The warmth vanished behind professional courtesy. "Of course. Eleanor, if you will excuse me." He left with Victoria, and Eleanor stood in the barn, surrounded by cowboys who suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. She felt Billy's sympathetic glance before he too departed. Alone, Eleanor pressed her hand against her chest, willing her heart to slow, willing the ache to subside. It did not. That evening, working in Nate's study to review breeding records, Eleanor found herself unable to concentrate. The room smelled of leather and pipe tobacco, of the man who spent his evenings here planning and worrying and carrying the weight of 3 generations. She was comparing fertility charts when the door opened. Nate entered, looking surprised to find her there. "I apologize. I thought you would be finished by now." "Nearly done. I can leave if you need the space." "No." The word came quickly. "No, please stay. I have ledgers to update. We can work together." So they did, in a silence that felt charged with electricity. Eleanor sat at the desk. Nate settled into the chair by the fireplace, account book spread across his lap. The only sounds were the scratch of pens on paper and the crackle of burning wood. Eleanor found her eyes drifting to him, watching the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, the concentration on his face as he worked, the strength in his hands as he wrote. "You are staring," Nate said without looking up. Eleanor jerked her attention back to her papers, heat flooding her cheeks. "My apologies. I did not say I minded." The quiet statement hung in the air. Eleanor looked up to find Nate watching her, now ledgers forgotten. His gaze held an intensity that made her skin warm. "This is dangerous," she said softly. "I know. You are engaged. I know that too." Nate set aside his ledgers and stood, moved to the desk where Eleanor sat, leaned against it close enough that she could smell worn leather and wood smoke, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "The engagement was built on false premises," he said quietly. on the belief that I could never have children, on resignation to a future without hope. And now I find myself wanting things I swore I would never want again." His hand moved to her face, fingers gentle against her cheek. Eleanor's eyes drifted closed at the contact, at the tenderness she had not expected from this stern man. "Eleanor," he whispered. She opened her eyes, found his face inches from hers, saw the longing there, the conflict, the desperate want. "We should not," she breathed even as she leaned toward him. "No, we should not." But he was bending down and she was rising, and the space between them was disappearing like morning mist. The door slammed open with explosive force. Victoria stood there, eyes blazing with fury, barely contained beneath a veneer of false sweetness. "Nathaniel, darling, I have been looking everywhere for you." She practically spat the word darling loaded with venom and possession. Nate straightened immediately, creating distance between himself and Eleanor, but the guilt on his face was visible, the interrupted intimacy obvious. Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I see you have been quite occupied with ranch business." The emphasis on the last words made clear what she thought of Eleanor's presence. "Dr. Hartwell and I were reviewing breeding records," Nate said, his voice carefully neutral. "How very thorough of you both." Victoria moved into the room, claimed space with the confidence of someone who considered herself already in possession. "But I must steal you away, darling. The wedding planner is waiting. We have decisions to make about the ceremony." Nate's jaw tightened, but he was trapped by duty and propriety. "Of course, Eleanor, we can continue this tomorrow." The dismissal stung, even though Eleanor understood its necessity. She gathered her papers, kept her face expressionless, and left the study without looking back. Behind her she heard Victoria's voice, honey-sweet and poisonous. "Really, Nathaniel, you must be more careful about appearances. People might get the wrong idea about your relationship with the help." Eleanor did not hear Nate's response, did not want to hear it. She retreated to her quarters and tried very hard not to think about how close they had come to kissing, how much she had wanted it, how wrong it was to want something that belonged to another woman. That night, alone in the darkness, Victoria Blackwood sat at her writing desk, composing a letter she would never send. The words poured out anyway, a confession to no one. She had loved Nathaniel Thornridge since she was 18 years old, had seen him at a territorial social tall and serious and impossibly handsome, and felt her heart simply stop. But he had barely noticed her. She was just another rancher's daughter, unremarkable and uninteresting. For 14 years she had loved him from a distance, had watched him build his ranch, had heard about the accident, had learned of his devastating diagnosis. And when her own father's financial empire crumbled, when tuberculosis began eating him alive, when the Blackwood Ranch teetered on the edge of foreclosure, she had seen an opportunity, a marriage of convenience. Nathaniel needed a wife despite his sterility. She needed salvation for her dying father and their ancestral land. It was perfect, practical, bloodless. Except she did love him, had always loved him, and he would never love her back. Victoria's hand trembled as she wrote. The pregnancy complicated everything. 3 months along with Marcus Vane's child, the gunslinger she had taken to her bed in a moment of desperate loneliness. The plan had been simple. Marry Nathaniel before the pregnancy showed, announce the miracle baby, let everyone assume the sterile rancher had somehow fathered a child. It would have worked. It should have worked. Then Eleanor Hartwell arrived with her Eastern education and her kind eyes and her obvious intelligence. Arrived and looked at Nathaniel the way Victoria had looked at him for 14 years. And worse, so much worse, Nathaniel looked back. Victoria crumpled the letter. She was not a good person. She knew this. But she was desperate, and desperation transformed good people into monsters. If Eleanor Hartwell stood between Victoria and salvation, then Eleanor Hartwell would have to be removed. The medical results arrived 10 days after the samples were sent. A telegram delivered to Eleanor's quarters by courier from Denver. Her hand shook as she opened the envelope. The words blurred before her eyes at first, then came into sharp, undeniable focus. Patient shows normal sperm count. Motility within acceptable range. Hormone levels indicate full fertility function. Assessment patient capable of fathering children. Previous diagnosis appears to have been trauma-based, not indicative of permanent condition. 8 years natural healing has restored reproductive capability. Eleanor read the telegram 3 times, then sat down heavily on her bed, the paper clutched in trembling fingers. Nate was not sterile, had not been sterile for years probably. The damage from the bull goring had healed naturally. He was capable of everything he thought lost to him forever. She needed to tell him immediately. But how? Where Eleanor made a decision. She saddled a horse awkward still at the task, but determined. Asked a passing ranch hand where Nate might be found. "Ridge Point, ma'am. He goes there when he needs to think." She rode the 2 miles slowly, giving herself time to plan what to say. How to tell a man that 8 years of grief and resignation had been based on incomplete information. How to give someone back their future. She found him sitting on a boulder, looking out over the valley his family had built. The afternoon sun painted everything gold. The peaks rose unchanging against the horizon. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. Nate turned as he heard her approach, stood as she dismounted. "Eleanor," just her name, but weighted with question. She walked to him, the telegram folded in her coat pocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "The results came," she said simply. Nate went absolutely still. His face lost all color. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Tell me." Eleanor pulled out the telegram, handed it to him with shaking hands. She watched him read it, watched his eyes move across the words once, twice, 3 times, watched understanding dawn like sunrise, watched 8 years of pain crack and shatter. The telegram fell from his hands. Nate staggered backward, sat down hard on the boulder. He covered his face with both hands, and his shoulders began to shake. Eleanor moved to him, knelt in the snow at his feet, gently pulled his hands away from his face. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. Silent sobs racked his broad frame. He looked at her with eyes that held wonder and anguish and disbelief in equal measure. "I can have children," he whispered. "I can have children." Eleanor nodded, her own tears flowing freely now. "You can have everything you thought lost. Family, heirs, future." Nate's hands moved to her face, cradling it with infinite gentleness. "You gave this to me. You gave me back my life. Science gave it to you. Your body healed itself. I just proved it. You gave me hope when I had none. You made me believe in possibilities." They were close now, kneeling together in the snow, the wind whipping around them. Nate's thumbs brushed away Eleanor's tears. His eyes searched hers. "I am engaged," he said, voice breaking. "I gave my word. But God help me, Eleanor, I do not want to marry her. I want you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Nate, tell me to stop. Tell me this is wrong." "It is wrong." "Then why does it feel like the only right thing I have felt in 8 years?" He leaned forward, and Eleanor met him halfway. Their lips touched, gentle at first, tentative, then deeper. 8 years of loneliness and 6 weeks of denied attraction poured into that kiss. Eleanor's arms wrapped around his neck. His hands pulled her closer until no space existed between them. The kiss tasted of salt and hope of snow and desperation of everything that could be and everything that should not. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "What do I do?" he whispered. The engagement was arranged to save the Blackwood family, to prevent Douglas from dying knowing he failed. How do I walk away from that obligation? Eleanor took his hands. "You made that promise believing you could never have children, that you were offering Victoria a barren future. But now the premises have changed. You are not broken. You can build a real family, with someone you love. With you, if you want me." Nate pulled her into his arms, held her with fierce tenderness. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything." In the distance, a gunshot cracked across the valley. Both of them jerked upright the moment shattered. "The ranch," Nate said, already moving. "Something is wrong." They mounted quickly and rode hard back toward the main complex. Eleanor saw smoke rising before they arrived, heard shouts carrying on the wind. The breeding barn was burning. Cowboys battled the flames with buckets of water and wet blankets. Sam directed the efforts, his voice cutting through the chaos. Nate dismounted at a run, joining the firefighting immediately. Eleanor raced to the barn entrance. Her research, months of work, the breeding records, everything. "Stay back." Sam grabbed her arm. "Too dangerous." They contained the fire to one section, saved most of the building. But when Eleanor was finally allowed to enter and assess the damage, her heart sank. Her equipment, destroyed. Research notes, burned. The detailed records she had been compiling, gone. And most critically, the medical coordination files, the ones that documented Nate's testing, stolen. Sam appeared at her side, his face grim. This was not accident. Someone set this deliberately. Before Eleanor could respond, a ranch hand approached. Pete, one of the older cowboys. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Boss Doc Hartwell, I found something in the doctor's quarters. Was checking to make sure the fire had not spread, and I saw this." He held out a silver horse figurine, ornate and clearly expensive. Nate's face went white. "That is my mother's. It has been missing from the main house for 3 weeks." Pete swallowed hard. It was in Dr. Hartwell's trunk, bottom compartment, hidden under her clothes. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "I have never seen that before. I did not take it." But even as she spoke, she saw doubt flicker in faces around her. Cowboys she had worked beside, men she thought respected her. Victoria materialized from the gathering crowd, her face a perfect mask of shock and concern. "Oh my God! Eleanor, how could you—" "I did not do this." Eleanor's voice rose. "Someone planted that figurine. Someone set this fire." Victoria's eyes gleamed with tears that looked suspiciously rehearsed. "Nathaniel, I am sorry, but I have to speak. I have had concerns about Dr. Hartwell's behavior for weeks, the way she looks at you, the inappropriate familiarity. I tried to give her benefit of doubt, but now theft. Sabotage. Those are lies." Eleanor spun to face Nate. "You know me. You know I would never do this." Nate stood frozen, torn between what he knew of Eleanor's character and the evidence before him. The entire ranch watched, waited for his judgment. He was not just a man in this moment. He was the landowner, the authority. His decision would set precedent, would show strength or weakness to everyone who depended on him. Eleanor saw the struggle on his face, saw duty war with feeling, saw the weight of responsibility crush the hope they had shared just hours before. When he spoke, his voice was dead, emotionless. "Dr. Hartwell, your contract is terminated effective immediately. You will be escorted to Cheyenne and placed on the first available train east." The words struck like physical blows. "Nate, please." "The evidence is clear." He would not meet her eyes. "Pete, Tom, see that Dr. Hartwell gathers her belongings and is transported safely to the train station." Victoria's hand moved to Nate's arm, possessive and triumphant. Eleanor looked at the man she loved, the man who had kissed her with such desperate tenderness just hours before, and saw nothing but cold authority. 2 cowboys escorted her to her quarters. They were gentle, uncomfortable with their task, but firm. Eleanor packed mechanically. The borrowed clothes, her medical texts, the telegram about Nate's fertility, crumpled now but still precious. As she was led to the wagon that would carry her away, she passed Victoria. Their eyes met for just a moment. Victoria's smile was small and vicious and victorious. Eleanor understood then, understood the depth of calculation and desperation that had led to this moment. But understanding changed nothing. The wagon lurched into motion. Eleanor did not look back at the ranch, did not watch Nate's figure growing smaller in the distance. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, her dignity intact. But inside, her heart shattered into pieces, small as snow. Behind her, invisible in the gathering dusk, Nate stood watching until the wagon disappeared from sight. Only then did he turn away his face, a mask of controlled anguish. The 8-hour wagon ride to Cheyenne passed in numb silence. Pete and Tom tried to make conversation, clearly feeling guilty about their role in this expulsion. "Ma'am, for what it is worth, I do not think you did it," Pete said quietly. Eleanor nodded, but did not trust herself to speak. They reached Cheyenne as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The town bustled with evening activity. Cowboys and merchants, families and travelers, all going about their lives unconcerned with the small tragedy of one woman's ruined reputation. Pete helped her down from the wagon, handled her trunk with careful respect. "The eastbound train departs tomorrow evening. We will see you settled at a respectable hotel." "Thank you, Pete. You have been kind." The hotel was small but clean. Eleanor took a room and sat by the window staring at nothing, processing the impossible speed with which her world had collapsed. 6 weeks ago she had been a respected professional, a scientist doing important work. She had been building something, creating something. Now she was branded a thief and saboteur, her contract terminated, her reputation destroyed. And Nate had chosen duty over trust, had chosen evidence over faith, had sent her away without even giving her a real chance to defend herself. She understood why. The political pressure, the need to appear impartial, the weight of 3 generations watching his every decision. Understanding did not make it hurt less. Eleanor pulled the telegram from her pocket, smoothed the creases, read the words again. Nate was not sterile, could father children, could build the family he desperately wanted. With Victoria. Because Eleanor was gone. Removed. Erased from his life as if she had never existed. She should burn the telegram, should destroy the evidence of what might have been. Instead, she folded it carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. A reminder. A terrible, precious reminder of the truth that would change nothing. Tomorrow she would board the train, would return east, would rebuild her life somehow, would try to forget gray eyes and rough hands and kisses that tasted of snow and hope. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve. Back at Thornridge Ranch, Nate sat alone in his study. A bottle of whiskey stood open on the desk. He had not touched it yet, did not trust himself to drink when every instinct screamed to obliterate consciousness. He had sent her away, had watched her face crumble, had chosen duty over his heart, and he hated himself for it. Sam entered without knocking. The old man's face showed disgust and disappointment. "You made a mistake." "I had no choice." "You always have a choice." Sam's voice rose, rare anger surfacing. "You know that girl's character. You know she would never steal, never sabotage." The evidence was clear. To hell with evidence. You love her, and you let her be driven away because you were too afraid to fight for her. Nate surged to his feet. "What would you have me do? Ignore theft, ignore sabotage, show favoritism to the woman I care about, and lose the respect of every man on this ranch? I would have you trust your heart for once instead of your damned sense of duty." The two men faced each other across the desk, years of mutual respect suddenly brittle as old ice. "The engagement to Victoria stands," Nate said quietly. "I gave my word. Eleanor will go back east. This will be forgotten." Sam looked at the young man he had helped raise, saw the pain beneath the rigid control, and made a decision. "I am going to investigate, and I will prove that girl's innocence." "Sam, you can order me not to, but then I will resign my position and do it anyway." Nate sank back into his chair. "Do what you must." Sam left without another word. Alone again, Nate finally reached for the whiskey, poured a glass, stared at the amber liquid. Eleanor's face haunted him, the way she had looked at him on Ridge Point, the joy in her eyes when she told him he could have children, the taste of her kiss, the trust in her touch, all of it destroyed by duty and fear. Nate drank. It did not help. Sam Bridger had spent 40 years learning to read sign, tracking animals and men across harsh terrain. The skills served him well now as he began investigating Victoria Blackwood with methodical precision. He started with the staff, quiet conversations, subtle questions, bribes where necessary, Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. Victoria had tried to dismiss, proved invaluable. Miss Blackwood asked for master key 3 days before the fire, the older woman confided. Said she needed to check guest quarters for wedding preparations, but she was in Dr. Hartwell's room for 20 minutes, alone. Timeline established, opportunity confirmed. Billy, the young stable hand, provided another piece. I saw Miss Victoria coming from the breeding barn the night of the fire, late, maybe 11 o'clock. She was carrying a satchel. Thought it was odd, ma'am, not usually going to barns at night. Motive and method becoming clear. But Sam needed more. Needed proof that would be undeniable even to Nate's stubborn sense of honor. He rode to Cheyenne, found the hotel where he had seen Victoria meeting her lover weeks before, bribed the desk clerk, learned Marcus Vane's name, tracked the gunslinger to a saloon on the rough edge of town. Marcus was drinking alone, looking like a man with conscience troubles. Sam bought him whiskey and loosened his tongue. She promised me $5,000, Marcus slurred after his fourth drink. Said I would get it after the wedding, after she announced the baby. Said Thornridge would never know it was not his. Sam kept his face neutral, even as rage built in his chest. The baby is yours then. 3 months along, she is hiding it with tight corsets, planning to announce after marriage, let everyone think the sterile rancher somehow performed a miracle. Sam bought Marcus one more drink, then left before he did something he would regret. The pieces fit together now. Desperate woman, dying father, failing ranch, pregnancy by wrong man, marriage to wealthy landowner, the only salvation. And Eleanor had stood in the way of that salvation. Sam compiled everything, witness statements, timeline. Marcus's confession obtained with whiskey but recorded with careful notes. Financial records showing Blackwood's debts. 3 days after Eleanor's departure, Sam walked into Nate's office and dropped the folder on the desk. Read it, all of it. Then tell me you made the right decision. Nate opened the folder, read slowly, methodically. Sam watched color drain from his face, watched hands begin to shake, watched understanding dawn like terrible sunrise. She framed Eleanor, Nate whispered. Victoria framed her to remove a rival. And she is carrying another man's child, planning to pass it as yours, to deceive you about your own heir. Nate stood abruptly, the folder falling to the floor. How long since Eleanor left? 3 days. Train to Omaha runs twice weekly. Next one departs Cheyenne tonight at 8. If she is still there, if she has not already left for points east, you have 4 hours. Nate was already moving, grabbing his coat. Have midnight saddled, fastest route to Cheyenne. And Victoria. When I return, I will deal with her. But first I have to stop Eleanor from leaving. He paused at the door. Thank you, Sam, for not giving up when I did. Then he was gone, racing against time, and his own failures, praying he was not too late. Sam watched him go, then smiled grimly and went to prepare the confrontation with Victoria Blackwood. Some battles could not be avoided, only delayed. Justice, he thought, was coming, and it would be harsh and fair and absolute. Midnight lived up to his name. The black stallion tore across the Wyoming landscape like shadow-given form hooves pounding frozen earth in rhythm with Nate's hammering heart. 25 miles to Cheyenne, less than 4 hours until the eastbound train departed. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and indifferent to human desperation. Nate leaned low over Midnight's neck, urging every ounce of speed from the willing animal. His mind replayed Sam's evidence in merciless detail. Victoria's manipulation, the planted figurine, the pregnancy with another man's child, the calculated destruction of an innocent woman's reputation, and beneath all of it, his own failure. His choice of duty over trust, his willingness to believe evidence over the character of the woman he loved. Eleanor. Her name was a prayer in his mind, a plea for forgiveness he did not deserve. The miles fell away beneath Midnight's hooves. Nate pushed harder than he should, knowing he asked too much of even this magnificent horse, but Eleanor was worth the risk, worth everything. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon as the sun touched the mountains. The town's buildings cast long shadows across the main street. Nate could hear the train whistle in the distance. A warning, a countdown. He drove midnight straight to the train station, scattering pedestrians and earning curses from other riders. Dismounted before the horse fully stopped. Left the reins dangling, trusting some good soul would see to the exhausted animal. The station was crowded with the usual chaos of departure. Families saying goodbye, merchants loading cargo, cowboys heading to distant work, the press of humanity moving with purpose through the large space. Nate scanned faces desperately. Where was she? Had she already boarded? Was he too late? Then he saw her. Eleanor sat on a wooden bench near the platform entrance, a small trunk beside her. She wore a simple traveling dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She held a book open in her lap, but her eyes were not moving across the page. She was staring at nothing, lost in thoughts Nate knew were painful. Even in her stillness, even marked by sorrow, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The station seemed to pause as Nate walked toward her. Conversations diminished. Heads turned. Recognition rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel Thornridge, the landowner. What was he doing here? Eleanor felt the change in atmosphere before she saw him. Looked up. Her eyes found his across the crowded space. Nate watched emotions flash across her face. Surprise. Hope. Then guards slamming into place. She stood her posture defensive. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to see the shadows beneath her eyes, the evidence of tears she had cried alone. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing. "Stopping you from leaving. You made your choice. You believed her over me." The accusation was deserved. Nate accepted it without flinching. "I made the worst decision of my life. I was a fool and a coward, and I am here to make it right." Eleanor's fingers gripped her book hard enough to crease the pages. "You cannot just appear and expect forgiveness." "I do not expect it, but I am begging for it anyway." The entire station was watching now. Conversations had stopped completely. This was entertainment, drama, the kind of scene people would tell their grandchildren about. Nate did not care. Let them watch. Let them witness his public humiliation. It was nothing compared to what Eleanor had endured. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear. 3 days ago I sent away the woman I love, branded her a thief based on fabricated evidence. I did it because I was trapped by duty and honor and my own damned fear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's eyes went wide. "Nate, stop. You do not have to do this." "Yes, I do." He took a step closer. "You were framed by Victoria Blackwood. She planted the figurine. She set the fire. She sabotaged your work, all to remove you as a threat to her plan." Eleanor's breath caught. "You know this for certain." Sam investigated, found witnesses, got a confession from the man Victoria has been meeting in secret, the man who fathered the child she is carrying. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. This was better than theater. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. "She is pregnant, with another man's child. 3 months along. She planned to marry me and pass the baby as mine, to deceive me about my own heir." Nate's voice roughened with emotion. "But I do not care about Victoria. I care about you. About the fact that I failed you when you needed me to believe. About the fact that I sent you away instead of fighting for you." He did something then that shocked every person in that train station. Something that violated every code of masculine pride and social propriety. Nathaniel Thornridge, owner of 50,000 acres, leader of men, respected landowner of the Wyoming Territory, dropped to his knees on the dirty station floor. The collective gasp was audible even over the train whistle. Eleanor stared down at him, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Nate, get up. Everyone is watching." "Let them watch." He took her hands in his. "Eleanor Hartwell, you came into my life like a blizzard, unexpected, powerful, transforming everything in your path. You gave me hope I had buried for 8 years. You showed me I was not broken. You made me want to fight for a real future instead of accepting a hollow existence." His voice broke slightly. "I failed you. I let fear and duty override what my heart knew was true, and I am here on my knees in front of this entire town begging for your forgiveness." Eleanor was crying openly now. "You hurt me. You chose evidence over faith." "I know, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life earning back your trust." "What about Victoria? Your engagement? Her family?" Nate's grip on her hands tightened. "The engagement is ended. Victoria framed you. She is pregnant with another man's child. Sam has documented proof of everything." He pulled the folder from his coat, handed it to her. "Read it. See the truth." Eleanor took the folder with shaking hands. Scanned the witness statements, the timeline, the confession from Marcus Vane. Her scientific mind processed the information, sorted truth from fiction, arrived at the inevitable conclusion. She had been systematically destroyed by a desperate woman. "Oh my God," she whispered. Nate remained kneeling, waiting, letting her process, giving her time to decide if forgiveness was even possible. Eleanor looked down at this proud man on his knees before her, thought of the journey that had brought them here, the blizzard rescue, the growing connection, the medical discovery, the stolen kiss, the betrayal, the redemption. "You rode 25 miles to stop me from leaving," she said quietly. "I would have ridden 500. You knelt in public, in front of half the town. I would kneel before the entire territory if it meant keeping you." Eleanor felt the last of her defensive walls crumble. "You are an idiot, Nathaniel Thornridge." "I know. A stubborn, duty-bound, emotionally constipated idiot." The ghost of a smile touched Nate's mouth. "I know that too. And I love you anyway." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, hard and deep and thoroughly in front of God and everyone. The station erupted in applause and cheers. Hats flew in the air. Men whistled. Women dabbed at their eyes. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me. To Thornridge Ranch. To our future." Eleanor nodded against him. "Yes. God help me, yes." Then she remembered. The medical results. "Nate, you are not sterile. The tests confirmed it." She pulled the crumpled telegram from her pocket. "You can have children. We can have children." Nate read the telegram again, and the wonder on his face was beautiful to see. He picked Eleanor up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, set her down, and kissed her again. "We are getting married, as soon as possible." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "There is still the matter of your current engagement." Nate's face hardened. "Not for much longer. Come, we have a visit to make." The ride to Blackwood Ranch took 3 hours. They traveled together on midnight, Eleanor seated in front of Nate, his arms around her, keeping her safe. They spoke little, both processing the seismic shifts in their lives. But the silence was comfortable now, hopeful. The silence of two people who had found each other despite impossible odds. Douglas Blackwood's property showed signs of neglect, fences in need of repair, buildings weathered and sagging, cattle thin and scattered, the physical manifestation of financial ruin and approaching death. Victoria met them at the main house. She looked composed, even regal, in an expensive dress that could not quite hide the slight thickening of her waist. "Nathaniel, I did not expect you." Her eyes flicked to Eleanor with barely concealed venom. "Or your companion." "We need to talk," Nate said. His voice carried no warmth. "Inside." The parlor was shabby genteel. Good furniture grown worn, carpet faded by sun and time. The smell of sickness hung in the air. Tuberculosis, death waiting patiently. Nate did not waste time on pleasantries. "There will be no wedding, Victoria." She went very still. "I do not understand." "I know about the frame-up, about the planted figurine, about the fire you set." Victoria's composure cracked. "Just slightly. Just enough." "That is ridiculous. You have no proof." Nate laid out the evidence. Witness statements, timeline, Marcus Vane's confession about the pregnancy. With each revelation, Victoria's facade crumbled further. When Nate finished, she stood trembling, no longer the composed society woman, just a desperate, frightened girl facing ruin. "You do not understand," she whispered. "I had no choice." "There is always a choice." "No." Her voice rose. "Father is dying. We are losing everything. The bank will foreclose in 6 weeks. This marriage was our only salvation." She turned on Eleanor with sudden fury. "And then you appeared, with your Eastern education and your kind eyes and your obvious intelligence. You looked at him the way I have looked at him for 14 years, and he looked back." Tears began streaming down Victoria's face. "I loved you, Nathaniel." Her voice broke completely. "I have loved you since I was 18 years old. 14 years of watching you from a distance. 14 years of hoping you would see me. But you never did. And when you finally needed a wife, it was for business, not for love. Never for love." She looked at Eleanor with eyes full of anguish. Then she arrived. A stranger. And in 6 weeks she had what I spent 14 years begging for. Your attention, your heart, your love. The pain in her voice was genuine, raw, the confession of a broken heart. Eleanor felt unexpected sympathy. She understood loving someone who did not love you back, understood the desperation of watching your world collapse. "I am pregnant with a child whose father does not love me," Victoria continued. "I am about to lose my home. My father will die knowing I failed him. What was I supposed to do? Let it all fall apart?" "Not destroy an innocent woman," Nate said quietly. "There were other paths." Douglas Blackwood appeared in the doorway then, thin to the point of emaciation, face gray with illness, but his eyes were still sharp. "What is happening here?" Victoria collapsed into a chair. "It is over, Father. I have ruined everything." Douglas looked at Nate. "You are ending the engagement." It was not a question. "I am." The old man nodded slowly. "We do not deserve your mercy after what my daughter did." "No," Nate agreed. "But I am offering it anyway." He laid out his proposal. Fair price for the Blackwood water rights. $50,000. Enough to clear their debts and leave Victoria with inheritance. Enough for Douglas to die knowing his daughter was secure. In exchange, Victoria would publicly retract her accusations against Eleanor, would ensure Marcus Vane left Wyoming permanently, would accept the consequences of her actions with what dignity remained. Douglas listened in silence. When Nate finished, the old man's eyes were wet. "Why would you do this for us?" Nate glanced at Eleanor. "Because I have learned that mercy is stronger than revenge. Because your family has been on this land for 30 years, and because everyone deserves a second chance." Victoria looked at Nate with something like wonder mixed with grief. "I hated her," she said, gesturing to Eleanor. "I still do in some ways, but you are right. I did not deserve you. I never did." She stood with visible effort. "I will sign whatever papers are necessary, will make whatever public statements you require, and I will raise my child alone, knowing it will never have the life I wanted to give it." Eleanor surprised everyone, including herself, by speaking. "A child deserves love regardless of circumstances. I hope you can give that, Victoria." Victoria's eyes met hers. In that moment, an understanding passed between them. Not friendship, never that, but perhaps the beginning of peace. Douglas Blackwood extended his hand to Nate. "You are a better man than I was at your age. Thank you. For the mercy. For the dignity." They left Blackwood Ranch as the sun began to set. Eleanor looked back once at the house where a desperate woman and dying man faced an uncertain future with slightly more hope than they had possessed an hour before. "You did a good thing," she said to Nate. "I did the right thing. There is a difference." "Is there?" Nate smiled. "You taught me that. You showed me that rigid honor without compassion is just another form of cruelty." 2 days later, an urgent summons arrived. The Territorial Land Board was convening an emergency session at Fort Laramie. The subject, Thornridge land holdings and treaty validity. The railroad company, it seemed, was making a play for the property. arguing that without an heir, without continuation of the Thornridge bloodline, the treaties with the Arapaho were void, that the territory should seize the land for railroad development. Nate and Eleanor rode to Fort Laramie with Sam. The meeting chamber was formal and intimidating. United States flags, territorial seal, long table where 8 board members sat in judgment. Judge Cornelius Wade presided. A stern man in his late 50s known for fairness but also for strict interpretation of law. The railroad representative spoke first. Amos Gentry, expensive suit, oily voice. He laid out his case with practiced precision. The Thornridge claim rests on tribal treaty specifying bloodline continuation. But Mr. Thornridge is unmarried without heir and, according to medical records from 1875, permanently sterile. He cannot fulfill treaty requirements. The land should revert to territorial control. He produced the old diagnosis, Dr. Hartwell's assessment from 8 years ago. The board members murmured among themselves. Judge Wade looked at Nate. Mr. Thornridge, this is a serious allegation. Do you have potential for heir? The chamber went silent. Nate stood slowly, met the judge's eyes without flinching. I do, Your Honor. He pulled Dr. Shaw's telegram from his pocket. The 1875 diagnosis was based on emergency battlefield assessment. Modern medical examination reveals different conclusions. He handed the telegram to the judge, who read it carefully, then passed it to the other board members. The damage healed naturally over 8 years. I am capable of fathering children, and I intend to do so. Nate turned to Eleanor, who sat in the audience section. Miss Eleanor Hartwell has agreed to become my wife. We will continue the Thornridge bloodline and honor the treaties my grandfather signed. The chamber erupted in whispers and speculation. Amos Gentry scrambled. But they are not yet married. There is no guarantee of children. The government should seize this land now for railroad development that will benefit all citizens. Before anyone could respond, the chamber door opened. An old man entered, moving slowly but with dignity that commanded instant respect. Chief Standing Bear of the Arapaho Nation, 72 years old, face carved by weather and wisdom, eyes that had seen the world change beyond recognition. He walked to the front of the chamber. No one tried to stop him. His presence alone carried authority. I knew Nathaniel's grandfather, Standing Bear said in heavily accented but clear English. Good man, signed treaty in good faith 50 years ago, promised to respect our people and our sacred places. He turned to look at Nate. I have watched this young Thornridge. He keeps promises. He honors treaties. He protects the land as sacred trust, not as property to exploit. Standing Bear faced the board. The treaty does not require immediate heir. It requires commitment to continuation. Nathaniel's engagement to Miss Hartwell shows this commitment. The Arapaho Nation supports the Thornridge claim. The chief's endorsement carried weight. Judge Wade conferred with the other board members in hushed tones. Amos Gentry made one last attempt. But they are not married. The woman could change her mind. There is no guarantee, Nate interrupted. Then marry us now. Silence descended like snow. Eleanor stood. What? Nate crossed to her, took her hands. Judge Wade has authority to perform marriages. If the board requires proof of commitment, we will provide it. He looked into her eyes. I want you as my wife. Today, tomorrow, forever. But only if you want this. Eleanor looked at the man before her, the man who had saved her from a blizzard, who had given her work when women were denied opportunity, who had learned to trust his heart over his fear, who had ridden 25 miles and knelt in public and offered mercy when revenge would have been easier. Yes, she said clearly, marry me today, right here. Judge Wade looked shocked, but not displeased. This is highly irregular. Chief Standing Bear smiled. But fitting. Commitment proven through action. This is the old way, the true way. Sam stepped forward. I will stand as witness. Standing Bear nodded. As will I. Judge Wade conferred briefly with the board, then nodded. Very well. If both parties consent to immediate marriage, I will perform the ceremony. It was not the wedding Eleanor had imagined as a girl. No white dress or flowers, no family present except Sam as surrogate father, no music or celebration, but it was perfect anyway. Nate stood before her in dusty traveling clothes. Eleanor wore a simple day dress. They held hands in a frontier fort while a territorial judge read vows and an Arapaho chief blessed their union, and railroad men watched in frustrated silence. When Judge Wade said the words that made them husband and wife, Nate kissed Eleanor thoroughly. The chamber applauded despite the formality of the setting. The land board voted immediately after, 8-0 in favor of upholding Thornridge claims. The railroad would have to route around the property. The treaties would stand. Nate and Eleanor walked out of the chamber married, partners, building a future no one could have predicted 6 weeks earlier. Life at Thornridge Ranch settled into new rhythms. Eleanor resumed her cattle work now as permanent fixture rather than temporary consultant. The breeding program thrived under her care. Calf mortality dropped to 15%. The spring crop promised to be the best in a decade. She worked alongside Nate, learning the rhythms of ranch life. He taught her to ride properly with patience and gentle correction. She taught him scientific principles, delighted by his quick mind and genuine interest. They learned each other slowly, the way married couples do. Favorite foods and morning habits. Silences comfortable and conversations deep. The building of partnership that went beyond physical attraction to genuine friendship. Sam watched them with satisfaction. Mrs. Chin hummed while preparing meals. The ranch hands developed protective affection for the woman who had been wronged and vindicated. News filtered back about Victoria. She had given birth to a daughter named Julia, raised her alone at the downsized Blackwood Ranch. Douglas passed peacefully 3 months after the confrontation, knowing his daughter was secure. Victoria sent a brief note. Not an apology exactly, but acknowledgement, and thanks for mercy she had not deserved. Eleanor insisted they send a gift for the baby. Nate agreed. Forgiveness did not require friendship, but it did require letting go of bitterness. The seasons turned. Spring brought new calves and warming weather. Summer saw the ranch prosperous and productive. Fall brought harvest and preparation for winter. And through it all, Eleanor and Nate built something lasting, something real. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Nate took Eleanor back to Ridge Point, the place where he had proposed, where she had revealed the medical truth, where so much had changed. They sat wrapped in blankets, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "A year ago I thought my life was over," Nate said quietly. "I had resigned myself to a future of duty without joy, of going through motions without purpose." He pulled Eleanor closer. "You gave me back my life, my hope, my future." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "We gave each other those things." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the pines. Then Eleanor spoke. "Nate, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him pull back to look at her face. "What is it?" Eleanor took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Nate went absolutely still, his hand spread across her belly, protective and reverent. When he looked up, tears gleamed in his eyes. "You are certain?" "Yes, about 8 weeks along, I estimate." Nate let out a whoop of pure joy that echoed across the valley, picked Eleanor up and spun her carefully, mindful of her condition, set her down and knelt, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I have been waiting for you for so very long." Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling freely. "We are going to be parents. We are going to be a family." They held each other as the stars blazed overhead and the peaks bore silent witness, and the future they had fought for became tangible as the child growing between them. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor continued working until her 6th month, when Nate's protective instincts overrode her protests about being treated like fragile china. "I am pregnant, not incapacitated," she argued. "Our child is precious. You are precious. Humor me." The compromise was supervision rather than prohibition. Eleanor directed operations rather than performing physical labor. It satisfied them both. Dr. James Hartwell came from retirement to attend the birth. The old man's pride in his daughter was obvious, as was his satisfaction that his surgery 8 years earlier had ultimately led to this happiness. Spring of 1885 brought labor pains and a day that seemed to last forever. Nate paced outside the bedroom tradition demanding fathers remain absent during birth. Sam kept him company, offering whiskey and memories of his own children born decades past. Then a baby's cry split the air. Dr. Hartwell emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Nathaniel, healthy and strong." Nate burst into the room, found Eleanor exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Nate took the baby with shaking hands, looked down at the small face, saw his own winter steel gaze reflected back in miniature, felt his entire world shift and reform around this tiny person. "Samuel Thornridge, Jr.," Eleanor said. "After Sam, if you approve." Nate could only nod, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. They named him Samuel, called him Sam from the first day. The old ranch manager cried when he heard, unashamed of the tears. But as Nate held his son, Eleanor gasped. Dr. Hartwell moved quickly back to her side. "What is it?" "Another one," the old doctor said, surprise and delight mixing in his voice. "There is another baby coming." Nate's eyes went wide. "Twins." "Apparently so." 15 minutes later, a second child entered the world. A girl, smaller than her brother, but with lungs just as powerful. Sarah Grace Thornridge, named for Nate's late mother. Tiny and perfect and fierce. Nate sat on the bed, a baby in each arm, Eleanor leaning against him in exhaustion and joy. His family, complete and beautiful, and more than he had ever dared dream possible. "From sterile to father of twins," Dr. Hartwell observed, "medicine is a humbling profession." "From hopeless to the richest man in Wyoming Territory," Nate said, looking at the 3 people who had become his entire world. "Not because of land or cattle, because of this." 2 years passed in the beautiful chaos of raising twins. Sam and Sarah grew strong and healthy, curious and adventurous. Eleanor managed the ranch's breeding program while somehow also managing 2 toddlers. Nate split his time between ranching duties and fatherhood, discovering he was surprisingly good at both. The ranch prospered. The treaties held. Chief Standing Bear visited occasionally, watching the Thornridge children with approval. The bloodline continued. The sacred trust maintained. Eleanor became pregnant again. Not twins this time. A single child who would make them a family of 5. On a clear summer afternoon in 1887, Nate took his family to Ridge Point. Sam and Sarah rode in front of him on midnight, squealing with delight. Eleanor rode beside them on a gentle mare, one hand resting on her growing belly. They dismounted at the overlook, spread blankets, let the children toddle around under watchful eyes, sat together looking out over the land that 3 generations had built and a 4th generation would inherit. "They will ask someday," Nate said, watching Sam try to catch a butterfly, "how this all began." Eleanor smiled, one hand on her stomach where their 3rd child grew. "What will you tell them? That their mother appeared in a blizzard, an angel sent to save a man who had given up on salvation, that she gave me back everything I thought I had lost, that she taught me hope is stronger than resignation, and love is worth fighting for even when the world says it is impossible." He pulled Eleanor close, mindful of her pregnancy. That sometimes the storms that nearly destroy us bring exactly what we need. Eleanor leaned into his strength. "And I will tell them their father was a man of honor who learned that honor includes mercy, who protected what was sacred and built what was lasting, who gave me a home when I was lost and love when I had resigned myself to loneliness." Sam toddled over holding a crushed flower. Sarah followed, determined not to let her brother have anything she did not also possess. Nate scooped them both up, settling them on his lap. Eleanor wrapped her arms around all three, her family circle complete. The sterile rancher who thought his bloodline would end became father to 3 children, she said softly, with more to come. And the woman who made it possible rode beside him through every storm, Nate finished. Below them, Thorn Ridge Ranch spread across the valley, 50,000 acres, 3 generations of blood and sweat, treaties honored, legacy preserved. But that was not what mattered most to the man sitting on the ridge with his wife and children. What mattered was this: the weight of his son in his arms, the warmth of his daughter pressed against his side, the steady presence of his wife who had transformed his entire world, the child growing beneath her heart who would join them soon, family, future, hope reborn from ashes of despair. The Wyoming wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. The sun painted everything gold. The mountains stood eternal witnesses to human joy and sorrow and the resilience required to transform one into the other. Nate looked at Eleanor over the heads of their children. She smiled at him, that same smile that had first caught his attention in a barn lit by lamplight. The smile that promised tomorrow and forever, and all the beautiful ordinary moments in between. "I love you," he said. Simple words that carried the weight of everything. "And I love you," Eleanor replied. "Always." The children babbled between them, oblivious to the significance of the moment, of the miracle their existence represented, of the journey their parents had traveled to arrive at this perfect, impossible present. The children babbled between them, oblivious to the significance of the moment, of the miracle their existence represented, of the journey their parents had traveled to arrive at this perfect, impossible present. The sun descended toward the mountains. The shadows lengthened. The wind sang through the pines, and on a ridge overlooking 50,000 acres of Wyoming territory, a family sat together and counted their blessings. Legacy secured, love triumphant, hope fulfilled beyond measure. Today there was only this: a family on a ridge, a moment perfect and complete, a happiness earned through suffering and sweetened by the knowledge of how easily it all could have been lost. Nate pulled his wife closer, held his children tighter, and knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man who ever lived. Not because of land or legacy or the continuation of bloodlines, but because he had found love when he thought love was impossible, had built family when he thought family was forbidden, had discovered that second chances exist for those brave enough to seize them. The blizzard had brought Eleanor to him, but choice had kept her there. His choice to hope, her choice to believe, their choice to fight for something real in a world of convenience and compromise. And now, sitting on this ridge with everything that mattered gathered in his arms, Nate understood the truth his grandfather had tried to teach him long ago. Legacy was not about land. It was about love passed from one generation to the next, about values maintained and faith preserved, about teaching children to be brave and kind and honorable in a world that often rewarded none of those things. This was legacy, this moment, this family, this love. Everything else was just details. The stars began to emerge one by one until the sky blazed with light. Wyoming stretched vast and beautiful in all directions. Tomorrow would bring work and worry and all the ordinary challenges of living. But tonight there was only gratitude, only joy, only the profound satisfaction of a man who had walked through fire and emerged holding everything he had ever wanted. The mountains stood watch. The wind sang blessing, and a family sat together beneath the infinite sky, complete and whole and home at last.